I still remember the silence of that night. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until it feels louder than sound itself. I was deep inside a forgotten stretch of the national park, where the trees leaned too close and the fog hung low, glowing pale in the moonlight. My flashlight flickered with every step, its beam bending strangely against the mist, like the light itself didn't want to travel forward. Somewhere between the rustle of branches and the soft crunch of soil beneath my boots, I realized I hadn't heard a single bird, a single insect. Not even the distant hum of the river I knew was close by. The deeper I walked, the heavier the air grew, thick with static, like the air before a thunderstorm, though the sky above was empty and clear. My breath fogged in front of me, curling in strange patterns, as if the air was colder here than anywhere else. That's when the sound came, low, humming, steady, too steady to belong to nature, too mechanical to belong here at all. I stopped, heart pressing against my ribs. The light flickered again, and in that thin moment of darkness, I swear I saw movement between the trees. Long, pale, and wrong. That's when I knew. I wasn't alone, it was late. Past midnight, maybe closer to 2, the kind of hour when the forest forgets about people. When even the air feels older. I was out there for patrol, middle of November, just before the snow line. Cold enough that every breath left a ghost behind. The pines stood tall and black around me, like ribs of something buried. Everything was quiet. Until it wasn't. At first, I thought it was the wind, a faint vibration, low and steady, like a voice trapped inside the trees. It wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to move, sliding between trunks, circling me, a hum. Soft. Alive. I stopped walking. Even my boots felt too loud against the soil. The hum pulsed once. Then again, every time I turned, it slipped away, always just behind me or above or deeper in the dark. I tried calling out just to break it. Hello? My voice didn't carry. It just folded into the trees like smoke. No echo. Only the hum, answering in its slow, patient rhythm. I told myself it could be wind through frozen branches. Maybe power lines, except there were no power lines here. The station was 5 miles back. This deep, there was nothing but pine and dirt and silence. Still, I followed. The deeper I went, the thicker the fog became, silver gray and breathing. It wrapped around my flashlight beam, making it useless. The hum got clearer then, sharper, like the woods were tuning themselves, like something was waiting for me to listen. I remember the way it made my ribs ache, the way it seemed to crawl under my skin. Every part of me wanted to turn back, but curiosity always feels gentle before it kills you. The trail curved, and suddenly the trees opened up. A clearing. The fog hung low over the ground, not drifting but glowing. A faint light from below, pale and steady, as if the earth itself was breathing. The hum rose to a single note, not loud but perfect, clean. I knelt. The soil was damp, slick like skin after rain. It vibrated under my palm, a slow pulse, in time with my heart. Then, silence. Not the kind that comes from distance, the kind that presses against your ears, the kind that erases everything. I froze. My own breathing was the only thing left. And then behind me, a breath that wasn't mine, soft, human, close enough to move my hair. I didn't turn. I couldn't. For a long moment, we just stood there, me, the fog, the trees, and whatever waited behind me. It exhaled again. Longer this time, like it had been holding it in for years. I felt warmth brush the back of my neck. Moist air, faintly sweet, like sap or rot. The hum started again, lower now, as if the forest was whispering through its teeth. Something shifted in the fog ahead of me. Shapes that didn't belong to trees. I blinked, and the light beneath the soil flickered. Once, twice, then faded to black. Everything went still. Even the air stopped moving. I waited, not daring to breathe, until my knees started to ache. When I finally stood, the hum was gone. The forest had gone back to sleep. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt aware. I turned slowly. There was nothing there, just trees. Endless, watching trees. I backed out of the clearing, stepped by. It was late afternoon when I realized the trail had changed. The air was thick, wet with pine and dust, the kind that clung to the back of your throat. The forest felt older here, the trees taller, the sky thinner, fading from gray to amber. I'd been following the orange markers for hours. Small wooden squares nailed to trunks, faded but clear enough. Each one promised the same thing, the way out. I trusted them, until I didn't. Somewhere after the fourth ridge, I noticed the space between them grew longer. The fifth marker was higher up than the rest, almost out of reach. The sixth pointed the wrong way. I stopped and checked my map. The line was supposed to bend west, but the markers led north, deeper into the shaded part of the grid. Maybe I'd missed one. Maybe my compass was off. I tried to laugh it away, but the sound didn't fit the air. It just vanished. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no wind. Only a soft hum in my ears, like the forest was holding its breath. I took another step. The soil sank under my boot, damp and spongy. Each step heavier than the last. When I found the next marker, it wasn't nailed at eye level. It was low, barely above the ground. Tilted sideways, the nail was fresh, silver, not rusted like the others. That's when I checked behind me. And the marker I'd passed before was gone, only bare bark. No square, no nail. My throat went dry. The smell of sap thickened. It was sweet, almost metallic. I turned in a slow circle. The forest looked the same in every direction. Gray trunks, orange leaves, slanted light. But every path I looked at had an orange flash somewhere ahead. Too many of them. I picked one and started walking faster. Branches snapped under my boots, echoing too sharply. The air was colder now, pressing against my back like a hand. Another marker, and another, but each one looked newer than the last. Clean wood, wet paint. Someone had been here. Recently, I thought of other hikers, maybe a ranger, maybe a prank. But the forest didn't feel like a place for pranks. The sun was bleeding out behind the ridge. The light turned thin and blue. When I looked up again, the markers were gone. All of them, just empty trees fading into fog. I stood still, breathing slow. My pulse filled the silence like a drum. Then, faintly, there it was, orange, far ahead. I moved toward it, careful this time. Each step louder than it should have been. The marker glowed faintly, even in the dark. A soft, warm light like an ember trapped in wood. I reached out to touch it. It wasn't paint. The surface was smooth, warm, pulsing under my fingers, not nailed at all, grown into the bark. The glow spread in a slow ripple, climbing the trunk, twisting into shapes, circles, lines, something almost like writing. My hand trembled. I stepped back. The next tree lit up. Then another, each one bearing the same strange marks, breathing in the dark. The trail was alive with them now. Not orange, but pale gold, humming in rhythm. And for a moment it was beautiful, like a secret map I wasn't meant to read. Then the symbols shifted. They turned, each one pointing deeper into the forest. I looked at my map again. Useless, just lines and paper. The ink shimmered faintly in the fading light, as if the paper remembered something I didn't. I don't remember dropping it, but I remember running. The forest blurred. The fog thickened until it felt solid. Everywhere I looked, glowing signs, shifting slowly, turning to follow. No matter which way I moved, they rearranged, leading me forward, deeper, always deeper. The air grew colder, the hum louder, pressing against my chest. Then, silence. I stopped. The glow faded one tree at a time, like eyes closing. Darkness returned. Only the smell of pine and something burnt. I stood there, waiting for my heartbeat to slow. Trying to listen for anything human, there was nothing. Just the soft drip of water from the branches above. When I finally turned around, the trail was gone. No path. No footprints, only smooth soil and trees that looked untouched. But if I squinted, just for a second, I could still see them. Faint circles of light hidden under the bark. Waiting. I kept walking, though I didn't know which way anymore. The forest all looked the same, and sometimes between the trees I could swear I saw a flash of orange, faint, moving ahead of me, leading me somewhere I hadn't chosen. I didn't follow it this time, but I knew it would wait. Until I did. It was late August. The air smelled of pine resin and wet soil from the afternoon storm. I sat on the edge of the ridge, my backpack heavy beside me, watching the last light leak from the mountains. The campers had already started small fires, smoke curling upward in pale spirals. Voices softened into murmurs, blankets rustling as someone shifted to get comfortable. Even the wind felt tired. Then I saw it, a faint glow above the timberline. At first I thought it was a plane, distant, steady, familiar. But the light dipped. It moved slower than an aircraft should, weaving between the peaks. Not above them. Between them, too low, too precise. I held my breath. The warmth of the fire didn't reach me here. The fog from the storm drifted in ghostly sheets. A second light appeared. And a third. They moved together, dancing over the ridge like insects, but silent. No hum, no drone, no crackle of electricity. Just the soft shimmer against the darkening sky. I tried to call the others. My voice felt swallowed by the space between us. The campers were staring too, mouths open, eyes wide in reflected firelight. Then the lights came closer. Not a descent, not a swoop, a glide, deliberate between the sparse trees. They were almost overhead now. My chest tightened. The fire's warmth turned to a cold pinch along my spine. I reached for my phone. The screen was bright for a moment. Then static, dead, a tablet went black. A flashlight flickered out. Even the small generator sputtered once and died, leaving nothing but the smell of diesel and smoke. The forest fell silent. Not normal silence. Not the kind after wind or rain. It pressed against the ears, thick, alive. The kind that listens, I could feel it. Through my fingers. Through the soles of my boots. Through my chest. The lights moved overhead again, hovering. They pulsed softly, a rhythm I almost understood. A heartbeat too slow for a human, too exact for the wind. Branches shivered. A bird dropped from a high limb, feathers floating, motionless before it landed. The campers froze. Soft footsteps in the dirt, but no one moved. I tried to reach out, my hand trembling toward one of the lights. It shifted. Closer, closer, until it was directly above me. A pale dome of color, smooth and solid feeling, yet untouchable. Then the forest exhaled. Not the air, not the wind. Something deeper. A presence that rolled through the trees and into my bones. I pressed my arms against myself. The ground beneath me felt thick, alive, breathing. The fog swirled around our feet like smoke from a hidden fire. The campers whispered, though I couldn't hear words. Their faces pale in the unearthly glow. Every shadow sharp, every movement exaggerated. I turned slowly. All electronic light gone. The fire reduced to embers. Even the stars above seemed dimmer, swallowed by the strange haze. The lights pulsed once more, then began to move away. Not fast, but deliberate. Gliding back over the ridge, the hum I hadn't noticed, low, vibrating in my teeth, faded. The breath in the forest grew still. Silence returned, except it didn't. It hung in the air, waiting. Heavy, aware, patient. A quiet that seemed to watch, following each heartbeat, each shallow breath. We stayed like that for a long time, not speaking, not moving. The fog curling around our ankles like fingers. Finally, the lights disappeared. Over the ridge, gone. The forest exhaled again, soft, empty, and the electronics remained dead. The fire smoldered silently. Even the night felt lighter, fragile, like it might shatter if we blinked. I remember the smell, metal and rain, faintly sweet. I remember the way my chest throbbed, slow and aching. I remember the forest not being quiet exactly, but awake. We didn't move for hours. When the wind finally returned, it carried whispers of leaves and distant pines. We left the ridge at first light, carrying only shadows and the memory of a presence too close to ignore. The lights. They never touched the ground. They never made a sound. But they changed the space around us. And sometimes, even now, I can feel that silence waiting, just beyond the trees. Watching. The fog had been thick all day. Thick enough to swallow the trail, to blur the ridges, to turn the trees into shadowed walls. My boots sank into wet soil with every step. It was late October. The air smelled of decaying leaves and smoke from distant chimneys I couldn't see. The forest was silent, but heavy, like it was holding something. I had been walking for hours, hoping the trail would reappear. Every landmark I thought I recognized dissolved into mist. I was alone. Then I saw the light, a warm glow, steady through the white-gray fog. At first I thought it was a campfire, but it was small, enclosed, a lantern burning behind glass. The cabin rose quietly from the mist. Wood, dark and slick with moisture, smoke curling from a chimney that hadn't been there a moment ago. It looked lived in, safe. I approached, cautious, boots crunching softly against wet leaves. The door was slightly open, creaking as the wind shifted. Inside, the lantern hung from a hook above a table. Its light spilled in warm circles, revealing furniture that was wrong, chairs tall and narrow, too high for a human's reach. A table that seemed to stretch forever across the room, yet too slim to hold a meal. Drawers deep and thin, knobs polished smooth as stone. I touched one of the chairs. Cold. Wood, yes, but the grain felt strange. Too fine, almost flexible under my fingers. The air smelled faintly sweet like sap and candle wax. I took a step further. The floorboards groaned softly, echoing in a way that made the room seem bigger. The fog outside pressed against the windows, pale light leaking through like a quiet warning. I should have left then. I should have left when the lantern flickered. It went out. No wind. No draft. Just darkness swallowing the corners of the room. I froze, a soft scrape from the corner. I couldn't tell if it was wood or cloth or something else. A faint wet smell crept into my nose. I reached for the door, but it didn't move. Then it did. I yanked it open and ran. The fog slapped my face, cold and sharp. The leaves sucked at my boots as I stumbled forward. I glanced back. Nothing. No cabin. No light. No walls, not even smoke. The clearing had been empty all along. I stopped. The fog rolled over me, thick, tactile, smelling of earth and wet pine. My chest rose and fell faster than I noticed, each breath wet with mist. I tried to convince myself it had been a trick of the fog. A hallucination. My mind playing with the light. But the forest had shifted while I ran. The trees weren't where I remembered them. The trail was gone. Every branch, every root, every stone looked unfamiliar. I moved cautiously, trying to retrace my steps. The fog pressed against my face, my arms, my shoulders. I could hear the drip of water from leaves, the soft scuff of leaves underfoot, but nothing else. The cabin's lantern burned in my memory. A warm circle in the dark. A promise of help that wasn't real. I wondered briefly who had lived there. What could possibly build furniture like that? For what? I could still feel the texture of the chair under my fingers, the way the room had seemed to stretch around me. I walked for hours. The forest didn't change. The fog never lifted. Every step forward felt heavier. When the first gray light of dawn touched the tips of the trees, I finally stopped. Exhausted, soaked, alone. The memory of the cabin lingered. A place that had been real enough to touch, to feel, to see. Yet vanished as if it had never existed. I never found the trail again. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in low, I swear I can see a faint lantern glow in the distance. Not moving, waiting, and I remember the chairs. Too tall, too narrow, made for something that isn't human. I don't know if I'll ever understand it. I only know that curiosity brought me there. And regret is what followed. It was late February. Snow had been falling for hours, heavy and soft, blanketing the forest in white. Each step I took sank slightly, boots muffled against the frozen ground. The trail was quiet. Quiet enough that every breath sounded too loud. Every snap of a twig echoed sharp and lonely. I noticed them first without thinking. Footprints. Beside mine, fresh, matching my pace perfectly, I stopped. The air smelled cold, dry, and faintly metallic. The fog from my exhaled breath lingered in spirals before vanishing. I glanced around. Nothing. No other hiker. No shadow moving among the trees. The prints didn't waver. They followed exactly, step for step. Turning when I turned, slowing when I slowed, my chest tightened. I felt the snow press against my boots differently, as if it knew more than I did. A soft rustle came from the pines, too low to be wind, too slow to be animal. I walked again, and again they were there. Beside mine, the forest narrowed, branches forming crooked arches overhead. The snow reflected the pale gray light of the overcast sky, giving everything a muted glow. I could feel it, something moving just out of sight. My hands itched to reach out, to see if the prints belonged to someone, something. But the trail widened suddenly, and then they stopped. No imprint, no mark beside mine. The snow was untouched, as if the presence had simply stepped out of existence. I paused. The cold crept deeper under my coat. Every breath I took sounded louder, sharper, colder. The forest was silent again, not quiet, but aware. Watching. I stepped forward cautiously. The snow crunched under my boots, uneven now, because I was no longer being mirrored. My heart thumped too fast, filling my ears. I tried to convince myself it had been my imagination, wind settling the snow, an echo of some old path. But the feeling lingered, like a hand brushing against the back of my neck. Branches arched closer over the trail. A pine cone fell silently, landing a few feet away. I jumped. The scent of wet wood filled my nose. The hum in my chest didn't fade. I glanced behind me. Nothing. Just endless white, stretching into shadows of trees. I walked faster. The snow shifted differently under my boots now. Soft impressions that weren't mine, yet followed me in memory. The prints haunted every step. In my mind, they were there, pacing me. Always just behind, the trail curved. Light from the gray sky faded, leaving only the dim reflection off the snow. Every shadow stretched longer, darker, heavier. I slowed, hoping the forest would forget me. Hoping the prints had truly vanished. I stopped. No footprints, no wind. No life, only snow. The silence pressed against my ears. I could feel it moving through the trees, soft, patient, waiting. I kept moving, careful, slow, boot by boot, step by step, but sometimes I could swear I felt a weight beside me, a presence in rhythm with my own. Matching my pace in the corner of my vision, I didn't turn. I couldn't. The forest stretched forever. Snow swallowed everything. And yet, even when the prints disappeared, they stayed in my memory, not in the snow, not in the trees, but in the quiet spaces between each breath. I left the trail eventually. I found the road hours later. People, cars, noise. But every time I close my eyes, I can feel the footprints beside mine. Step for step, always following, always silent, always waiting. It was early March. The snow had melted in patches, leaving the earth wet and heavy with decay. I walked the narrow trail to the old ranger station, boots squelching through mud and rotting leaves. The station had been abandoned for years. The windows were fogged, the wood gray and splintered. Even the air felt older here, stale and heavy, like the forest had been holding its breath. I pushed the door open. It creaked on rusted hinges, echoing down the empty hallway. Dust swirled in the weak sunlight filtering through the cracks. Inside, everything was coated in gray. Shelves sagged under the weight of old supplies. A chair tipped on its side. Maps curled in the corners, brittle and yellowed. On a desk near the back, I saw it. A logbook. Leather cracked, edges frayed. Dust thick on the cover. I brushed it off. The smell of old paper and mildew filled my nose. My fingers lingered on the spine. I opened it. The pages were dense with handwriting, small and cramped. Notes about sightings, strange occurrences. Mentions of glowing figures. Whispers between the trees. Animals acting. Wrong. Some pages were missing. Ripped cleanly, as if someone had decided they didn't want certain things remembered. Others were smeared with something dark. Brown or black, sticky, almost wet in places. I could feel the residue on my fingertips. The scent made the back of my throat tighten. I kept turning pages. The further I went, the more desperate the notes became. Mentions of lights hovering, people following trails that led nowhere, markers that moved. I reached the last entry. It stopped mid-sentence. If you hear the voices, don't look up. The words ended in a long scratch mark across the page. Jagged, deep enough that the paper tore. The ink ran in dark lines like blood, staining the page further. I froze. The room felt colder. The dust seemed to settle differently, pressing against me. I could hear it, faint whispers. Not words I recognized. Not human, just voices. My pulse quickened. The floorboards beneath me creaked too sharply, too loud. The sunlight through the cracked window flickered, shadow and light mixing. For a moment, the room felt larger, stretching in ways it shouldn't. I ran my fingers over the page again. The scratches were deeper than ink. Something had wanted the warning to remain. Something had left it incomplete. Outside, the wind stirred. A branch tapped against the siding, hollow and slow. I smelled damp wood and something faintly metallic. The logbook felt heavier in my hands, like it carried more than words. I thought about the ranger who had written these notes, who had left some pages, destroyed others. Did he hear the voices too? Did he look up? I closed the book slowly. The whispers didn't stop. They seemed to cling to the edges of the room, brushing against my ears. I placed the logbook back on the desk. The dust rose, pale and thick. The sunlight dimmed. Shadows pooled in the corners. I took a step back. The silence pressed against me now, solid, aware. The air smelled faintly of sap and smoke. I could feel the hum in my chest, slow and steady. I didn't touch the logbook again. I didn't look around. I only walked toward the door. The station felt alive behind me, waiting, watching. Outside, the forest was calm. Snow patches and mud. Branches swaying gently in the breeze, but the memory of the scratches lingered. The weight of incomplete words. The knowledge that whatever had been recorded wasn't finished. I left the ranger station that day with nothing but the scent of old paper and something darker in my clothes. And every time I think of that place, I remember the last line. If you hear the voices, don't look up, because whatever waits above keeps its own record. It was late September. The forest smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. The air was cool, heavy with mist that curled around the tents like fingers. I had set up camp in a small clearing. A circle of stones held a fire that crackled softly, sending shadows dancing across the tree trunks. Everything was quiet, too quiet, but comforting at first. Then I heard it, a laugh. Low, soft, almost playful. Not from far away, but close, too close to be anyone else. I froze. The smell of smoke from the fire mingled with something sharper, metallic, like the smell of a blade left in the rain. My boots pressed into soft soil, yet I didn't move. Another laugh followed. A voice this time, clear, familiar. It wasn't my voice, yet it repeated a conversation I had never had. Word for word. Every pause, every hesitation, I leaned forward. The firelight flickered against my hands. The warmth on my skin felt uneven, as if something cold hovered just beyond the circle of light. I tried to convince myself it was the wind. Branches scraping against each other. An animal, perhaps. But the words came again. Soft, looping, circling. Laughter rising like smoke, mingling with voices I didn't recognize, yet somehow remembered. The fire crackled, then dimmed. A shadow passed over the flames, long and narrow. The glow shrank, leaving the clearing half in darkness. The voices grew louder, closer. They whispered fragments of arguments I had never had. Jokes I never made. Secrets I didn't tell. I stood trying to locate the sound. The mist wrapped around my legs, thick and wet. My breath came in short bursts. The forest was listening. Every tree a silent sentinel. Every shadow shifted slightly, leaning toward the fire. I took a cautious step backward. The laughter followed. The words circled, moving in arcs, from one side of the clearing to the other. Sometimes behind me, sometimes above. I reached for a stick, poked at the fire. It flared for a moment, smoke stinging my eyes. The voices reacted, rising, overlapping, mocking the rhythm of the flames. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. Only the echo of a question I had never asked whispered back at me. The fire sputtered. Small embers danced away, landing on the ground and dying quickly. Darkness spread over the clearing like a heavy cloth. The voices were everywhere now. Above, beside, behind, repeating, twisting, circling. They followed every movement, filling the spaces the fire had once illuminated. My hands shook. Cold sweat ran down my back. The smell of wet pine filled my nose, thick and sharp. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't stop. The echoes were inside my head. Inside the soil beneath me, inside the mist curling between the trees. I crouched, hugging my knees. The clearing seemed to expand, stretch impossibly, until the tree line vanished into gray. I could hear faint steps circling, soft, deliberate, unmeasurable. The fire finally went out. No sparks, no glow, only ash and smoke curling upward, invisible in the dark. And then, silence. Not empty silence. It pressed in, thick and aware, listening, waiting for me to move, waiting for me to look. I stayed still for a long time, breath shallow, eyes fixed on nothing, trying to catch a shadow, trying to hear a shape. When I finally stood, the mist had thinned slightly. The forest seemed calm again, but the smell lingered. Metallic, damp, and a faint trace of smoke. I packed up quickly. Each step away from the clearing sounded too loud. Every snap of a twig echoed too sharply. I glanced back once. No light, no fire. Only trees and fog. But I knew it hadn't gone. The echoes followed me, waiting for nightfall, waiting for another fire. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear it. Soft laughter. Words I never spoke. Repeating, circling, always circling. It was late October. The sun was low, brushing the canyon walls with pale gold. The air smelled of frost and dry pine, sharp in my nose. I paused on a narrow ledge, boots pressing against gravel and stone. Below, the canyon stretched like a dark wound, the river distant and muffled. Above, the ridge cut sharply against the sky, jagged and shadowed. That's when I saw it. A figure, pale, standing perfectly still against the skyline. At first, I thought it was another hiker, frozen to take in the view. Too far to make out clearly, but human enough in shape. I shifted my weight. The sun caught the edges of its body, making it glow faintly. The canyon smelled of cold stone and damp moss. I moved a hand to scratch my neck. And it did the same. My pulse quickened. The movement was small, subtle, but deliberate. I froze, breath thick and visible. It tilted its head when I tilted mine. Raised an arm when I raised mine. Every gesture mirrored perfectly. The air tightened around me. The canyon seemed quieter, as if it were holding its breath. My boots pressed into loose gravel, toes scraping lightly. The smell of pine sharpened, resin-rich and heavy. I stepped back. It stepped back. I raised a finger slowly, pointing at the river below. It did the same. I wanted to tell myself it was coincidence. That light and shadow played tricks across the ridge. But the rhythm of its movements was precise. A gust of wind stirred the canyon. My hair whipped across my forehead. The figure did not waver. I blinked. It blinked. A soft hum rose in my chest, unplaceable. The canyon walls reflected the sound, though the wind had died. The forest behind me rustled, too, as if aware. I moved my shoulder. It moved its shoulder. Step forward, and then it waved, slowly, deliberately. First, before I did, the blood drained from my face. The mist of my breath curled in thin ribbons. The ground felt sharp under my boots. I wanted to wave back. I wanted to look away, but curiosity anchored me. The figure did not blink. It did not sway. It remained still, pale against the fading gold. Yet every subtle motion, even the smallest tilt of its hand, was perfectly attuned to mine. The canyon echoed with silence, thick and alive. The wind died completely. Even the river seemed to pause, swallowing its own sound. I shifted my weight again. It mirrored me. Step back. Step back. My throat tightened. The air smelled faintly of iron, cold, and metallic. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I tried to speak. No sound came. My own voice swallowed by the canyon. I turned my head slightly. It did the same. Then, for a moment, the figure seemed to breathe. A subtle rise and fall, just enough to remind me it was alive, or pretending to be. I wanted to move. I wanted to climb down, run, disappear. But my feet felt rooted. Every step mirrored in shadow across the ridge. The sun dipped lower. The sky bled amber into gray. The figure's shape blurred at the edges, glowing faintly in the waning light. I could smell frost now, mingled with dry stone and pine sap. Every breath shivered in my chest. Every heartbeat thrummed in my ears. Then it raised its arm again, this time not waiting for me. A deliberate wave, slow, silent. I swallowed. The canyon seemed to lean closer, listening, watching. Every shadow deepened, stretching toward me. I did not wave back. I could not. I only watched. The figure remained. The ridge remained. The canyon remained. And I realized slowly that it had been watching me long before I saw it, learning, mirroring, waiting. I turned my back to leave. My boots crunched against gravel. Every step forward echoed across the empty canyon, and somewhere in the distance I could swear it moved in sync, just beyond my sight. I did not look back. Even now I feel its presence in the corner of my vision, mirroring subtle gestures, waiting for a movement I might make, always watching, always patient, always there. It was early November. The valley lay beneath a gray sky, trees stripped bare, their branches clawing at the wind. The air smelled damp, earthy, like rain left to rot in the soil. I carried a handheld radio, mostly for signal, mostly for comfort. The forest had grown quiet, too quiet, and my footsteps seemed unnaturally loud. The moment I stepped into the valley, the radio came alive. Static hissed and crackled, filling my ears. Not loud, but sharp, like it was pressing against my skull. At first, I thought it was interference. Mountains can do that. I adjusted the dial, and then I heard it. A whisper. My name, soft, stretched out, faint but distinct. Buried in the static, I froze. The wind pushed cold through my coat. Every sense sharpened. The smell of wet stone and pine sap hit my nose. I stepped forward. The radio pulsed. More static. And again. My name. It wasn't random. The bursts followed me. They paused when I paused. They rose and fell like breath. I tried speaking into the cold air. Nothing answered. Only the hiss and the whispering of my own name, looping, layering, circling. The valley walls seemed closer now. Gray cliffs pressed against the sky. Every shadow was heavy, moving slightly, just at the edge of my vision. I held the radio tighter. Fingers numb, teeth chattering. The static shaped itself again. Whispers now forming words. Phrases I thought I recognized from memory but couldn't place. Don't move. I froze, mid-step. The ground beneath my boots soft and wet. The valley smelled faintly of iron, as if the earth itself bled. I tried to leave. Step after step, the static followed. A pattern now deliberate. Rising and falling in rhythm with my heartbeat. I turned back. Nothing. Just the valley stretching endlessly, gray and empty. Yet the radio pulsed. Whispers closer, louder. Here. Follow. You. The words twisted, formed in broken sentences, then dissolved into hissing bursts again. My chest ached. My breath fogged in the cold. Each inhalation tasted of wet leaves and something faintly metallic. I stopped entirely. The valley pressed in on me. Every tree, every stone, every shadow seemed to lean closer, listening. The radio's hiss became a rhythm, like footsteps, soft, unmeasurable, not human. I dared not speak. The whispering grew faintly mocking, echoing tones I didn't remember making, each syllable curling around the edges of my mind. I lifted the radio. The static clung to it, shaping itself around my fingers, my arm. It wasn't just sound, it was weight, presence. I took a careful step forward. The whispers followed, repeating my own thoughts, mirroring me. I tried to shake it off. Step faster, run. But every motion brought it closer, deeper into my senses. The fog thickened. Gray walls pressed against me, every breath drawn sharp, every heartbeat loud. Finally, I stopped at the center of the valley. Radio in hand, static pulsing like it had a life of its own. The whispers circled me, just out of reach, never leaving, never ceasing. The valley itself felt aware, patient, watching. I set the radio down, slowly, almost afraid to touch the ground. The whispers faded slightly, leaving only the soft hiss of static. But I knew they would return. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the pattern. The rhythm of my name, stretching across empty valleys, calling, waiting, and I know, if I ever return, it will find me again. In the silence, in the fog, in the static. It was late September. The morning air smelled of damp earth and pine resin. Mist clung to the trees, softening the edges of the trails. I stopped at the ranger kiosk. Wood gray and weathered, maps and pamphlets tucked under plastic sheets. A topographic map caught my eye. Lines winding through valleys, rivers cutting paths between ridges. Everything looked precise. I traced the routes with my finger. Each trail seemed simple enough. Familiar landmarks marked clearly. I packed a small bag, grabbed my boots, and followed the map. At first, everything matched. The trail curved around a ridge. A small creek glimmered in the pale light. Birds called softly in the distance, but soon, something was off. The ridge I expected was further than I thought. The creek twisted differently, flowing opposite to the map. I stopped, breathed in the cold, wet air. The leaves underfoot were slick and silent. I retraced my steps. The map still showed me moving forward, yet every turn brought me back to the same clearing. A circle of stones, moss-covered, silent. No markers, no sign of another path. I checked the map again. Nothing had changed on paper, except the clearing I stood in seemed larger now. The lines felt tighter, edges blurred. A shadowy hum pressed against my ears, faint, unplaceable. I walked the trails once more, step by step, boots crunching over wet leaves and twigs. Every landmark appeared slightly wrong. Trees leaned where none should. Rocks jutted from the earth at impossible angles. The air smelled sharper now, metallic, cold, pressing against my lungs. Hours passed. The sun dipped, fading through the mist. I stopped in the familiar clearing. And then I saw it, the map, pinned to the kiosk again. As if I had never left, I approached slowly. The lines shifted beneath my eyes. The rivers twisted. The ridges warped. A red dot pulsed on the map. Softly, steady, and it marked my exact location. I stepped back. The clearing around me felt smaller, the mist curling at the edges of vision, swallowing the trees and stones. I could hear the faint rustle of something moving just beyond the fog. I touched the red dot. It didn't fade. It pulsed against my fingertip. Not ink, not paint. Something warmer, heavier. I stepped forward. The dot pulsed faster. I tried walking toward the ridge. The dot followed. Every path I took led back here. The clearing, the map, the red dot. I crouched, pressed my hands to my knees, breathing fast. The air smelled of wet stone and pine sap, but heavier somehow, thick with anticipation. The clearing was quiet. Not peaceful, but patient. I dared to look around. Shadows seemed to bend slightly toward me. Branches shifted where I wasn't touching. The fog pressed against my shoulders. I touched the map again. The pulsing red dot seemed to thrum with my heartbeat. Every pulse echoed in the silence of the clearing. I realized then, slowly, that the map wasn't just marking me. It was guiding me, or trapping me. I walked in circles, step after step, always ending back at the same spot. The red dot unwavering, watching. The sun disappeared behind clouds. Mist rolled thicker, swirling around my legs, masking the clearing's edges. I could hear my own boots crunching over leaves, yet every sound echoed differently, stretching and twisting. I wanted to leave. I wanted to follow the trails as the map promised. But every step brought me back. Back to the same stones, the same trees, the same pulsing red dot. I knelt. The air smelled colder now, damp and metallic. I pressed my forehead to the map. The dot pulsed faster, almost alive. I stepped back slowly. The clearing held me in its silence. Patient, unyielding, I left the kiosk. But even now, in the fading light, I can feel it. The red dot, always watching, always pulsing, waiting for the next step I take because the map has no exit. And the clearing never lets you go. It was late August. The night air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Fog crept along the forest floor, curling around the base of trees and rocks like smoke. Our camp was small. A few tents in a clearing, soft embers still glowing in a dying fire. The quiet was almost comforting until it wasn't. Around midnight I woke. A faint light pressed against the tent fabric. Soft, pale, shifting in strange arcs across the canvas walls. Shadows stretched, tall and narrow, moving like they were alive. I lay still. The air smelled faintly metallic. The damp fog crept in through the seams of the tent, curling around our feet. The lights pulsed slowly. One shadow lingered closest to the flap, stretching unnaturally long. I could hear my own heartbeat, soft, steady, shaking in my chest. One of the others whispered. A rustling sound, and then silence again. The shadow moved slightly, synchronized with the pulse of the light. Curiosity pressed against my ribs. I unzipped the flap slowly. The cold air rushed in, wet and smelling of moss. Nothing. Empty clearing. Mist rolling between the trees. No footprints, no flicker of movement. Only the faint glow of our fire's dying embers. I stepped out. Grass wet beneath my boots, every sound exaggerated. The crunch of leaves, the creak of branches. The lights had vanished. Shadows folded back into themselves. The forest seemed normal, but the smell lingered, metallic and sharp, like something had burned slightly in the air. Morning came slowly. Mist hung low, damp and clinging. Birds were quiet, too quiet. The clearing felt heavier. I walked the perimeter of our camp. The grass pressed damp against my fingers as I bent down. And then I saw them, circular impressions burned into the ground. Perfect, smooth, like something heavy had pressed down and left the earth scorched. The circles surrounded our tents, overlapping, forming strange patterns. I touched one. The soil was warm under my palm, faintly sticky. No ash, no fire, just burnt grass. The others came out, faces pale. We didn't speak. Only walked, step by step, tracing the impressions. The pattern made no sense, yet it felt deliberate, careful, watching. I could still smell the faint metallic tang in the air. The fog drifted through the impressions, curling and twisting. A soft hum seemed to rise from the ground, low, steady, almost imperceptible. We examined everything. No footprints led to or from the circles. No signs of animals, no branches broken. Just the burned patterns and our own unease pressing against us. I traced my finger along one edge. The warmth pulsed slightly beneath my skin. The fog wrapped tighter around us, curling into the spaces between the circles. I thought about the lights from the night. How the shadows had stretched, moved, lingered. How one had been closest, almost watching me breathe. I turned my gaze back to the clearing. The circles formed loops, spirals, lines that seemed impossible to recreate. It felt as though the forest had remembered, and then left a message. I didn't touch the impressions again. I didn't speak. I only walked slowly back to the tents. The morning felt fragile, the sun weak behind gray clouds. The air smelled damp, of pine and scorched grass. A low wind moved through the trees, carrying soft whispers I could not place. We packed up quickly, soft footsteps pressing against wet soil. Each step seemed louder than it should, echoing strangely through the fog. Before leaving, I looked back at the clearing. The circles remained, calm and deliberate, waiting. Even now, I remember the feeling of those impressions, warm under my fingertips, silent yet heavy with attention, and the memory of the lights, hovering outside the tent, shadows stretching tall, patient, and impossibly still. The forest didn't release us. It only let us go for a while. The circles remain in my mind. The lights linger in the edge of vision, and I know they could return at any night. It was early December. The forest smelled of wet wood and frost, the air sharp in my lungs. Fog hung low in the canyon, thick and curling, hiding everything below. I reached the bridge as the light dimmed. Narrow wooden planks spanning the gap where a river should rush. Only fog greeted me beneath, swirling and dense, swallowing the sound of water. I stepped onto the first plank. It bent slightly under my weight, groaning, soft but alive. The smell of damp timber rose, mingling with the metallic tang of frost. The air was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed hesitant, brushing against my ears in soft whispers. I moved forward. Each plank bent, dipped, pulling subtly downward as if something below tugged. My boots pressed carefully against wet wood. The fog below shifted, curling upward, brushing the undersides of the bridge. Halfway across, I stopped. The bridge shivered beneath me, a vibration that traveled up my legs. And then I heard it. Breathing, slow, steady, deep, like it had been waiting. I froze. The fog pressed closer, cool and damp, smelling faintly of moss and iron. Each inhale filled my lungs with it. I looked down. Nothing. No shapes. No river. Only gray fog, moving softly, hiding everything beneath. The bridge groaned again. Planks bending, curving, alive under my weight. It felt deliberate, as if the bridge itself was aware of me. I moved forward again, careful. The breathing continued following me. Not fast, not urgent. Slow, patient, curling around the fog like smoke. My hands pressed against the rope railing. Rough, wet from condensation. The wood hummed faintly under my fingers. I stopped mid-step. The fog below swirled differently now, thicker, darker. Shadows formed in its depths, though none were solid. A sense of being watched pressed upward from beneath. I leaned forward slightly. The planks bent unnaturally under my toes, pulling down. I could smell damp earth and something heavier, something organic, metallic. The breathing grew louder. It echoed, then softened. The rhythm matched mine, in and out, slow and deliberate. I dared not look down. The fog seemed to reach for the bridge. Every plank bending, creaking, alive, I took another step. The planks pulled against me, subtle but insistent. The rope railing pressed into my palms. The fog pressed against the undersides, curling tendrils toward me. I felt a pulse, something beneath the wood. A weight shifting, unseen. Breathing low and deliberate. Waiting. I pressed forward, each step a negotiation with the bridge. The fog swirled beneath, hiding what might be watching. Every sense was heightened. Smell of wet wood, cold frost biting my cheeks, the hum of tension in the air. Halfway, I stopped again. The breathing shifted slightly. Close now. I could feel it in my chest, in the fog, in the vibrating planks beneath me. I held my breath. The forest beyond the fog was silent. No wind, no birds. Only the bridge, the fog, and the slow, steady inhalation beneath. I moved forward again. Each plank a soft groan bowing beneath me. I could smell the frost and damp timber mixed with a sharp metallic tang rising from the fog. The far side of the bridge came into view. Gray mist curling between the planks and the canyon walls. No river, no clear ground, only fog and the memory of the breathing that had followed me. I reached solid earth. My boots sank slightly into frost-covered soil. The bridge behind me shivered once, faintly as if releasing me. I turned back. The fog hid everything beneath. The bridge swayed faintly in the empty air, quiet now. I walked away slowly, breath sharp, heartbeat loud in my ears. The smell of wet wood lingered, mingling with frost and iron. The forest remained silent, patient. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it. The planks bending, the fog curling beneath. The steady, deliberate breathing, waiting. Beneath the bridge over empty water. It was late October. The air outside smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. Fog clung to the hillside where the old mine entrance yawned, dark and patient. I stepped closer. Wooden beams rotting at the edges framed the opening. A faint draft smelled of wet stone and rusted metal. The flashlight in my hand barely pierced the darkness. Dust floated in the beam, dancing slowly, suspended like tiny ghosts. Every breath stirred it, cold against my lungs. I stepped inside. The floor was uneven, slick with mud. Each footfall pressed into silence, only the echo of my boots bouncing softly against stone. Then I heard it. A tap. Soft. Behind the wall, perhaps. It echoed my step, or so it seemed. I froze. The damp smell thickened, clinging to my hair and jacket. The flashlight flickered against timber supports, revealing shadows that twisted at the edges. Another tap. It followed me this time. One step, one tap, step, tap, I whispered to myself. The words felt thin, fragile, swallowed by the mine. The tap, it answered. A syllable, matching mine. I stepped deeper. The darkness pressed closer. Walls seemed narrower, bending inward. Every surface glistened with wet stone, smelling faintly of iron. Step, tap, step, tap. The rhythm grew deliberate. No longer random. The taps formed patterns, broken into pauses, measured like a heartbeat. I reached a fork in the shaft. Wooden supports groaned above me. The air smelled heavier here, earth and metal and something else I couldn't name. I chose the left passage. The tapping followed. Every step answered in kind. Slower now, echoing more distinctly. I paused. The tap became 2 taps, then 3. Then syllables, sharp, precise, forming words. Wha? T. R. Yo. O. The sound rolled slowly, syllable by syllable, drawn out like the mine itself was speaking. My chest tightened. The wet stone beneath my fingertips seemed to pulse with each echoed word. I swallowed. The mine smelled of wet clay, decaying wood, and a faint metallic tang. as if the earth itself bled. Each syllable of the echo pressed against my ears, soft and yet undeniable. I stepped forward. Step. The taps mirrored my movement, each syllable lingering just behind, curling around the walls. The passage narrowed. My flashlight caught jagged edges of rock. Shadows deepened, moving slightly at the edge of vision. The echo repeated again. Yo. I pressed my back against a timber support. The air was heavy, humid, carrying the smell of iron and stone deep into my lungs. The taps slowed, then paused. Silence. I moved again. One careful footstep, a single tap, one slow syllable. The mind seemed to breathe. Walls shifted in the corner of my eyes, timber creaking as though alive. The echo followed, soft, patient, repeating me. I tried calling out. My own voice seemed swallowed instantly by the damp air. Only the taps answered. Syllables, echoing word by word, syllable by syllable. I kept moving. The mind twisted unexpectedly. Every turn felt familiar yet wrong. I could smell wet stone pressing in from all sides. The echo persisted. Who is the A shadow moved barely at the edge of my light. I froze. The taps paused, waiting. Then a single syllable, yo, I whispered back. The answer came, slow, deliberate. Ooh. My chest felt tight. Every breath hung heavy, damp, metallic. The echoes pressed closer, wrapping around me, feeding off each step. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed. Yet the mind seemed endless, folding inward, repeating my footsteps, my syllables, my name into its walls. I backed toward the entrance. The echoes followed. Soft, deliberate, patient. Every word mirrored, syllable by syllable, pressed into the damp air. The daylight outside appeared faint through the entrance. The mind smelled less metallic now, more like wet wood and cold earth. But the echo lingered, a slow, steady repetition of my own steps and my own voice. I stepped out. The fog pressed against my jacket, damp and heavy. The mind fell silent behind me, patient, waiting. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it. The tapping, the words, each syllable curling in the corners of my mind, repeating, echoing, waiting. It was late September. Fog draped the forest like a thick, wet blanket. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, sharp and cold against my lungs. I followed the trail. Leaves pressed wet underfoot. Every step crunched softly, swallowed by the mist that clung to the ground. Then I saw it, a lantern. Swinging gently ahead, its pale light cutting through the fog. The figure carrying it was distant, blurred, impossible to focus on. Edges of shadow shifted strangely, as though it wasn't quite solid. I moved forward. The lantern swayed in rhythm with my steps. Every footfall pressed into the wet earth, echoing faintly against the silence. Mist curled around my boots, damp and cold. The figure remained just ahead. I could see only the glow of the lantern and the vague outline of something human, or almost human. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something older, like rusted metal left in rain. I quickened my pace. The lantern bobbed in front of me, moving slowly, impossibly ahead. The fog thickened with each step, curling around trees and roots like fingers. I called out softly. No reply. Only the faint hum of the forest and the rhythm of my own breathing. The lantern's light wavered slightly, as if teasing me. I followed. The trail curved. Mist rose around me in waves, damp against my face. Every tree seemed to lean closer, shadows stretching in unnatural ways. Then I tried to turn back. My boots slipped slightly on the wet trail. And the lantern? It was behind me, swinging gently, pale and teasing as if I had never left it. The fog shifted around it, soft and curling, hiding the figure once again in its depth. I froze. The smell of smoke lingered, mingling with the forest damp. Breath puffed in clouds that dissolved almost instantly. The lantern swung slowly, unhurried, patient. I stepped forward again. The trail seemed longer, bending impossibly. Roots snagged my boots. Leaves brushed cold against my legs. The lantern remained ahead. Or maybe it was always just out of reach. I tried calling again. My voice sounded strange, muffled by the fog. No answer. Only the soft whisper of leaves and the swing of the lantern. The figure didn't resolve. Edges blurred and shifted in the mist. It was neither near nor far. The light it carried danced in ways that defied my eyes. I stopped. The lantern's glow reflected off wet leaves. It illuminated nothing solid. The forest felt heavy, patient, watching. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, slow and deliberate. I took another step. The fog thickened, cold against my face and hands. The lantern moved with me. Every movement I made mirrored in the rhythm of its swing. Then I turned abruptly, hoping to confront it, to find the figure clearly. And it was behind me again, closer now, soft footsteps in the mist that weren't mine. I shivered. The air smelled damp, earthy, and faintly metallic. The lantern swung gently, light spilling unevenly, teasing shadows across trees and fog alike. I walked slowly forward. The trail seemed endless. The lantern hovered just ahead. Always ahead. Always behind, I whispered to the fog. The sound of my own voice felt strange, swallowed by the damp air. No reply. Only the soft swing of the lantern. The forest was quiet, yet alive. Every leaf, every root, every curl of mist seemed to watch me. I could feel it pressing in, soft and patient. The lantern moved with the pulse of the forest. I stopped again. The figure never came into focus. The lantern hung in the mist, neither close nor far. Its glow pale, hypnotic, patient. I backed away slowly. The fog curled around me, clinging, damp and persistent. The lantern followed, swinging, teasing, guiding me deeper. Every sense heightened. The smell of smoke and wet earth, the cold brush of leaves, the soft pressure of the mist. Eventually, I reached a bend in the trail. The lantern disappeared for a moment, swallowed by fog. I dared to breathe. The forest felt hollow, patient, watching. And then I heard it again. Soft footsteps behind me. The subtle swing of a lantern, impossibly close. I did not turn. The fog swallowed everything. I moved forward, careful, silent. The lantern remained, pale and patient, waiting for me in the mist. I know it will always be there. Ahead, behind, swinging gently, watching, guiding me deeper into the fog where the trail no longer exists. It was early spring. The forest smelled of wet moss and thawing earth. The air was crisp, sharp, filling my lungs with frost and pine. I walked the trail slowly, boots pressing into soft mud. Branches brushed my jacket, leaves damp and fragrant. Something felt off. The trees were still, impossibly still. No rustling, no calls, no birds. I looked up. Nests sat in every branch, woven tightly, eggs pale and perfect. Yet not a single feather moved. The usual chatter of wings and song was gone. I stopped. A shiver ran down my spine, cold in the quiet. The wind whispered through branches, faint, hesitant. No chirps, no flutter, only emptiness, I continued. The smell of damp wood filled my nose, faintly metallic. Every step sounded loud in the absence of life. Even my own breathing felt intrusive. By late afternoon, the sun was low. Shadows stretched long across the forest floor. I returned to the ranger cabin, footsteps soft against frost-damp boards. The cabin was silent, windows shut tight. The smell of old pine and dust lingered inside. I tried to settle, to shake the unease curling in my chest. Night came. Fog pressed against the glass, pale and curling, damp and insistent. The forest remained quiet outside, unnervingly so. Then I heard it. Soft chirps, tiny, delicate, echoing inside the cabin. Windows closed tight. The air still. No birds should be here. I froze. The chirps repeated, a careful rhythm circling around the room. Faint shadows flickered under the furniture. The smell of damp pine and cold wood grew heavier. I moved slowly, footsteps careful, pressing into the worn floorboards. The chirps shifted with me, soft, patient, waiting. I touched a window. Cold glass, no drafts. Yet the faint echo of tiny wings seemed to follow me. I checked the nests outside. Eggs still, pale and unbroken. Branches unmoved. No bird calls. Still inside the cabin, the faint chirps continued. I sat in the corner. The lamp flickered, casting pale light across rough wood walls. The sound circled me, gentle at first, then deliberate, layering over itself. A quiet presence, patient and waiting. The fog outside thickened. It pressed against the cabin, curling around the walls. The forest smelled sharper now, wet wood, moss, iron. I tried to focus on something else. A map on the table, keys, the small stove. all ordinary, yet the chirps continued. Soft, almost coaxing. I leaned against the wall. Breath shallow. The silence outside felt alive, stretching inward. The chirps seemed to come from every corner at once. I whispered my own name. The chirps responded faintly, a gentle echo that wasn't meant to comfort. I couldn't tell if it was mimicry or something else entirely. Time passed slowly. The cabin walls seemed to shrink, pressing close. The fog curling, smell thickening, pine, moss, damp earth, metallic tang. The chirps never stopped. Finally, I rose, moved toward the door, cautious. The chirps followed. Each step echoed in the room, layering with the soft sound that shouldn't exist. Outside, the fog was endless. The forest still, no birds, just the quiet, heavy, and the lingering echo of the cabin's impossible sound. I stepped back inside. The door shut behind me with a soft click. The chirps circled again, faint, patient, unseen. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The forest waited outside. The silence inside whispered. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear them. Soft, delicate, impossible chirps echoing from nowhere. Waiting. Silent birds. It was late October. Cold air pressed against my face as I climbed the rickety stairs of the fire lookout. Fog stretched across the valley, heavy and damp, curling around the pines below. The tower creaked beneath my weight. Metal groaned softly. Each step echoed, swallowed by the mist. I reached the platform. The wind stung my cheeks. The forest lay quiet, still. Then I saw them. Figures, glowing faintly, pale and wavering, moving slowly between the trees. I froze. Each one seemed impossible, too tall, too thin, edges blurred in the fog. They didn't speak. They didn't climb, just stood. I watched them for hours. The fog curled between them, damp and cold. Breath left clouds in front of my face. The figures shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, like shadows stirred by wind. I tried to focus on the forest. Trees swayed faintly, the smell of wet pine filling my nose. But my eyes kept drifting back. To the pale, hovering light of the figures. They never approached the tower, never moved closer. Yet I felt their attention. Something patient, ancient, waiting, night deepened. The air grew heavier. Static seemed to pulse faintly against the skin, like a low hum vibrating in my bones. The figures remained silent and unblinking. I couldn't stop staring. Shadows of trees leaned strangely. Mist thickened around their forms, curling in unnatural ways. The glow from the figures reflected faintly off wet branches. Hours passed. I felt the cold seep through my clothes, breath shallow, my hands numb against the railing. The forest smelled sharper now. Earth, wet wood, faint smoke from nowhere. I thought about leaving. But fear held me, glued to the platform. Every instinct screamed to descend, yet my eyes couldn't leave them. Then, almost imperceptibly, they shifted. The fog moved around them differently. The faint glow deepened. A sense of presence pressed closer, though their distance never changed. I noticed details I hadn't before. Hands, too long, pale, resting at their sides. Shapes of fingers like shadows stretched unnaturally. The air around them shimmered faintly. I realized I could see no eyes. No faces. Ours became a rhythm. Wind, fog, silence. The figures never blinked, never spoke, never moved toward me. Yet I could feel them watching. Dawn crept slowly across the horizon. Mist thinned. The sun's pale light touched the tops of trees. I blinked. The figures were gone. Vanished as if they had never existed. The forest returned to normal, still damp, still heavy with pine and earth. I exhaled, shaky. Then I saw it. Handprints, burned into the metal supports of the tower, pale, almost glowing in the morning light. Too large, too perfect. Each finger stretched unnaturally long, like they had pressed and held through the night. I ran my hand near them. Cold, though the morning sun had warmed the metal. No warmth from the prints themselves. No residual movement, only the memory of something that had been there. The fog receded completely. The forest returned to ordinary sounds, birds calling faintly, wind through the pines. Yet a hum lingered in my bones, a quiet, vibrating presence that refused to leave. I descended the stairs slowly. Every step felt heavier, as if the print's weight pressed down. The forest smelled clean now, pine and earth. But the memory of those figures, patient, silent, watching, it stayed with me. I left the tower that morning. The sun was higher, the valley bright. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Even now, when the wind presses against my window, when mist curls around trees, I remember the faint glow, the figures at the fire tower, and the handprints burned into metal, waiting, patient, silent. It was midsummer. The air smelled of wet stone and pine, heavy near the mountain lake. The water looked calm, pale blue, reflecting jagged peaks above. I stepped in. Cold wrapped around my legs, sharp against sun-warmed skin. Ripples spread slowly, gentle and wide. I swam farther, arms slicing through the water. The lake was silent, except for the faint hiss of droplets falling from my hair. A scent of algae and wet stone filled my nose. Then I saw it. Dark shapes beneath the surface, long moving silently. Not fish, too large, gliding in smooth, deliberate curves. I froze, heart slow at first. Then faster. Ripples radiated from the shadows as if something massive was circling me. The water around me thickened, darker, colder. I kicked toward the shore. Wet stones pressed into my palms as I scrambled out. Breath sharp, lungs burning. The shapes followed, moving beneath, unseen but palpable. I stood, dripping, listening. The surface shimmered, subtle waves, tiny disturbances in the still water. A hum lingered, low, vibrating, as if the lake itself was alive. The wind stirred the pines. Their needles whispered, brushing against each other. Yet the lake remained. Different, watching. I took a step back. Ripples circled again, widening and overlapping. I imagined the size of whatever moved beneath, something impossible, gliding silently just out of sight. A shiver ran down my spine, cold and wet. I crouched at the edge, hand in the water. The surface trembled beneath my fingers, smooth, heavy, deliberate. I looked across the lake. The mountains reflected in pale morning light. Everything seemed ordinary. Yet I couldn't ignore the sense of presence, circling, patient. I moved slowly along the shore, feet sinking into soft mud, wet pine needles clinging. The ripples followed. No splash, no sound, only the faint movement of water bending around something unseen. I stopped. The water was still. Sunlight flickered on tiny waves. I told myself it was imagination. But the unease pressed in, sharp and constant. A shadow passed beneath the surface, long, smooth. I could see it in the shifting light, moving deliberately, close enough to feel its presence. My chest tightened. I wanted to run, but my legs were heavy with water and fear. I leaned back, wet hands on stone. The scent of damp earth and pine filled my nose. The breeze trembled across the lake. Ripples traced circles that didn't make sense, moving as if something beneath was testing me. Time stretched, each breath loud, echoing in my skull. The lake whispered against the shore, subtle, patient. Shapes beneath moved in silent patterns, always just out of reach. I imagined what it would be, huge, impossibly long, gliding beneath the surface. The water, once calm, felt alive. It pressed against my legs, the air thick with anticipation, with something waiting. Finally, I rose. Wet stones slippery underfoot, shivers running up my spine. The ripples continued, circling slowly as if to follow, to guide, to warn. I stepped back from the edge. The lake reflected the sky again. Nothing visible. But the hum lingered, faint and low. A reminder that beneath the placid surface, something watched. I walked along the shoreline. Every step echoed on wet stone and mud. The smell of pine and water followed, crisp and unsettling. The dark shapes didn't reappear. Yet I knew they were there, beneath, patient, gliding, waiting. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel the pull of the water, the smooth glide beneath, the unseen presence circling, silent and endless. Shadows in the lake, watching. It was early autumn. The air smelled crisp, like fallen leaves and cold stone. A faint wind rustled through the pines, soft against my ears. I lay on the damp grass. Above me, the sky stretched wide and clear. Stars twinkled, pale and familiar, or so I thought. At first, it was subtle, Some stars brighter than usual. Some missing. I traced constellations with my eyes, or tried to. The shapes felt wrong, slightly twisted. Familiar patterns bent, shifted, as if the sky had misremembered itself. A hush settled over the forest. Even the wind seemed to pause. Branches stopped brushing against one another. Only my breath, shallow and quick, filled the silence. Then one star, alone, sharp, luminous, began to grow. Slowly, a weight in the sky, descending, lowering toward the treetops. I froze, hands pressed against the cold earth. Its glow touched the needles of the tallest pines, pale and unnatural. I blinked. The star was closer now. Too close. Its light stretched across the clearing, pale and wide. The air smelled metallic, faint like rust under wet stone. I wanted to look away, but my eyes were drawn to it, to the slow, deliberate movement. No sound accompanied it. No hum. Just the soft shiver of leaves in a motionless forest. It lowered behind the pines. And then, silence. The hush deepened. Not like absence of wind or birds, but something heavier pressing in. The kind of silence that feels aware, as though it's listening. I stepped forward, feet sinking slightly into the damp grass. The scent of pine and wet earth strong in my nose. The clearing seemed smaller now, enclosed by shadow. The trees loomed darker than before. I reached toward the spot where the star had vanished, expecting perhaps a glimmer, a reflection, a trick of my eyes. Nothing. Only shadow, deep and still. The forest held its breath. Leaves hung frozen. A crow far off did not caw. Even the distant mountains were muted, as if the world itself had quieted in anticipation. I tried to tell myself it was imagination. That stars shift subtly, that my mind was playing tricks after long hours of watching, but the weight in the air was undeniable. The pressure of something out of place, unnatural, sitting just beyond sight. A sudden flicker of movement caught the corner of my eye, shadow stretching along the tree line. I turned slowly. Nothing. Just darkness between trunks where the moonlight should have reached. I crouched low, hands brushing cold grass. The silence pressed against my ears, filling every space. A hum, faint, almost imperceptible, tickled the edges of thought. Not from the sky, not from the earth. Somewhere else, I shivered, a chill running down my spine. The smell of damp pine intensified. A hint of smoke, distant and faint, though no fire burned. Above, the sky looked normal again. Stars scattered in familiar patterns. But I couldn't shake the memory of the one star, large and lowering, and the suffocating quiet that followed. I rose to my feet. Grass wet against my ankles, dew soaking my shoes. Every step felt heavy, deliberate, as though the earth itself had thickened. The forest held its shape, but the weight of wrongness lingered, invisible yet tangible. I walked toward the edge of the clearing. Branches scraped softly against my arms. A single pine needle fell, its tap sharp against fallen leaves. Everything else? Still, I stopped, listened. The hum returned faintly under my skin, in my teeth, in the hollow of my chest. A vibration I could not place, a whisper of the star's descent. Slowly, I backed away, step by step, letting shadow cover me. The clearing receded, the trees closed in. The forest exhaled around me. Even now, I remember the shift, the quiet that waited after the star vanished. The feeling of wrongness in the air, a sky that does not belong, a silence that listens. And I know, if I ever look up on a clear night again, I will search for the star that fell behind the pines. And I will hear the forest holding its breath, the wrong stars, watching, waiting. It was midwinter. The forest smelled of cold pine and frozen earth. Breath came out in soft clouds, curling against my face. I followed the path down to the pond. Ice stretched smooth across its surface. The reflection was sharp, almost too perfect. Every branch, every snow-laden twig, mirrored as though the world had folded over itself. I knelt at the edge, fingers brushing the brittle snow. The air was still. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the glassy surface. And then I noticed it, a figure, tall, standing directly behind me in the ice. Not a shadow, not a distortion. It had shape, form, presence. I froze. The forest around me sounded distant. Branches groaned softly. Snow shifted beneath some hidden weight. I turned, slowly, eyes wide, heart rising like a trapped bird. Nothing, no one, just the pond. Smooth, pale, cold, the figure remained. In the ice, watching, still, unblinking. I crouched lower. The surface rippled slightly beneath the weight of my gaze. My reflection and the figures, two shapes, one impossible. Every detail of the forest behind us mirrored exactly, except it was alone in the real world. I stepped back. Snow crunched underfoot. The cold bit through my gloves. The figure in the ice didn't move, but it felt alive. It breathed through the frozen air, quiet and deliberate. A wind stirred. It did not shake the trees, only brushed my cheeks, carrying the scent of ice and damp pine. I could feel the forest holding itself as if waiting. I knelt again, face inches from the ice. Its eyes, or what felt like eyes, were black hollows, empty. And yet they seemed to pierce through the thin layer of frozen water, right into me. I swallowed hard, fingers trembling against the snow. The reflection mimicked my smallest movements. Turned my head slightly. It tilted in sync, shifted weight, matched me perfectly. I staggered backward, kicking snow behind me. The figure remained in the ice, patient, silent. I blinked, and the wind dropped. Everything stopped, a soft, cracking sound. The ice beneath my feet, tiny fractures spiderwebbing outward. The reflection wavered slightly, and the figure leaned forward, just a fraction. I stumbled, falling to the frozen ground. Cold bit through my jacket, breath loud in my ears. I couldn't look away. It was impossible. No one could be behind me. Yet in the ice, it stood, tall, still, watching. Neither threatening nor moving, and yet every nerve screamed fear. The pond reflected the forest. The snow, the trees, even the gray sky. But the figure, my impossible companion, remained. A presence not bound by reality. It existed only in that frozen mirror, yet its attention felt tangible. I rose slowly, every step careful, deliberate. The ice groaned faintly beneath my weight. I turned my back completely. Walked away. Snow swallowed my footsteps. When I glanced back, just once, there was nothing. No figure, only smooth ice, only the reflection of trees and sky. The forest seemed normal, yet something had changed. A lingering sense of eyes behind, a weight in the air I could not shake. I left the pond, breath forming small clouds in front of me. Every step carried the memory of that reflection. The impossible figure frozen in place, watching, waiting, tethered only to the ice. Even now I can feel it. If I ever pass that pond again, I know it will be there, in the glassy surface, waiting, perfect, still, and silent. The mirror of ice, and the figure that exists only within it, watching me always. It was late autumn. The valley smelled of wet leaves and cold stone. Mist clung low to the ground, curling around tree trunks. The night air was still, heavy, almost liquid. I lay in my tent, listening. A soft rustling from the trees, the occasional snap of a twig under a distant animal's foot. Everything normal, until the whistle came, high-pitched, clear, piercing through the fog. It didn't roll across the valley. It hovered. Shrill, cold, deliberate. I sat up, ears straining. Outside, shadows shifted among the pines. The smell of damp moss filled my nose. No wind, no movement that could explain the sound. Rangers had searched before. All night, they said. Nothing, no source. Only the echo of that whistle bouncing off the hills, empty and precise. I zipped my sleeping bag tighter around me. The whistle came again. Closer this time. It moved. Step by step, inch by inch, I froze. Heart pounding. The canvas of the tent brushed against my shoulders. Breath shallow, smelling of wood smoke and cold earth. The sound circled, and then paused outside, right outside. The whistle ended abruptly. Silence. Thick, almost solid. I couldn't hear my own heartbeat. Or could I? It felt louder than it should. I dared a peek through the thin flap of the tent. Mist swirled, pale and ghost-like. Nothing moved. No light, no shadow, no figure. Only the empty valley waiting. I thought it might be a trick of the wind. A branch snapping, a whistle of air through rocks. But my chest tightened. The instinct to move, to run, pressed against my mind. And still, the valley remained impossibly quiet. I sat back down, wrapped my arms around my knees. Every rustle of leaves sounded like movement behind the mist. Every snapping twig sounded deliberate, intentional. The whistle came again, closer, and this time I could feel it, not just in my ears but in my chest. A vibration that made the air feel alive. Like someone breathing just beyond the fabric of the tent, I whispered to myself, though the words felt absurd. "Who's there?" The wind swallowed my voice. The whisper returned, faint, high, and impossible. A reply, or maybe just the echo of my fear. I didn't dare move. Every small sound, my own heartbeat, the rustling of the canvas, felt magnified. The whistle drifted closer again, circling the tent. Slow, measured, patient. I felt the cold edge of the night press against my back. The canvas of the tent brushed lightly, a shadow, or the air itself moving with intent. It stopped. Directly outside the flap, the valley fell silent like someone had held their breath. The mist swirled, dense and smelling faintly of wet pine needles, and then nothing, no sound, no presence, only the tent walls trembling under my grip. I stayed awake until dawn. The whistle never returned in the daylight. The valley looked normal, empty, still, but I could feel it had been there, watching, circling, waiting for night to fall again. Even now I hear it sometimes. A faint, impossible note drifting through the edges of silence. The valley remembers it. And I remember it, always, the whistle in the dark, moving closer, ending just outside my tent, patient, silent, hungry for the next night. It was early autumn. The forest smelled of damp earth and pine resin. Mist curled low along the trail, curling around roots and fallen branches. The air was quiet, except for the soft crunch of our boots over the frost-hardened leaves. We came upon it just as the light dimmed. A campsite, abandoned. Everything left as if in a hurry. Tents sagging, sleeping bags still sprawled across the ground. A kettle sat on the fire, steam still rising, smelling faintly of last night's coffee. I stepped closer. The frost underfoot made a faint crackle. Branches shivered overhead, brushing against one another. The air smelled sharper here, like the forest itself was holding its breath. No voices, no footprints approaching the camp. Just the empty echo of human presence. I knelt by the fire pit. The ash had fresh impressions, footprints. Soft but defined, leading into the woods. They weren't ours, the silence stretched. Too thick, like the forest had swallowed sound whole. I moved from tent to tent, tracing the path of abandoned lives. A backpack unzipped, half open, maps spilling like secrets. A water bottle tipped over, water frozen in the shape of mid-pour. A jacket draped over a log stiffened with frost. It was as if the campers had vanished mid-step, mid-thought. The footprints in the ash drew me in. Step by step, deeper into the mist. The trees closed around us, their bark damp and cold under my fingers. Branches brushed against my arms, leaving the scent of wet pine needles. I paused, a soft rustle behind me. No wind, no animal, just the quiet thrum of unseen movement. We followed the tracks through the undergrowth. The fog thickened, swallowing shapes and muting sounds. Every snapped twig, every shift of leaves felt deliberate, measured, watching. At one point, I glanced back at the camp. It seemed to lean, stretching, almost breathing. The fire pit glimmered faintly in the mist, as if reluctant to release its heat. The empty tents swayed gently, though no wind stirred. We kept walking. The footprints never faltered, never slowed. They threaded between gnarled roots, across hidden streams, until the forest swallowed them entirely. The ash, the fire pit, the abandoned life. Left behind like a whisper, I stopped. The mist pressed in, cold and damp, dripping from branches to coat my hair. The smell of smoke lingered ghostly over the earth. A sense of being observed prickled my skin. Every small sound, our breaths, our boots, a distant drip of water felt amplified. The forest listened. And it knew. We lingered at the edge of where the footprints vanished. The woods stretched endlessly beyond, gray and silent, pulsing with unseen life. It felt like the air itself was alive, waiting, patient. I wanted to turn back, to retreat to the empty campsite. But the way back seemed wrong. The mist had shifted, hiding paths we thought familiar. The forest had changed around us, a sudden rustle to the left. Branches scraped together softly, almost like whispers. We froze, The footprints ended. And yet, I felt the movement continue. The presence lingered unseen, close. I backed away slowly. The camp reappeared in the mist, tents leaning, sleeping bags undisturbed. The fire pit glimmered faintly again. The footprints in the ash. Still leading nowhere, I didn't touch anything. Just watched. The forest seemed to sigh, a low exhale that shivered through the trees. The mist clung tighter, curling around our ankles as if to guide us away. We left the campsite quietly. No sound to mark our retreat, only the lingering smell of cold smoke and pine, and the echo of footsteps that should not exist. Even now, I can picture it. The abandoned tents, the half-frozen coffee in the kettle, the footprints that led into the heart of the forest, step by step silent, waiting for the next wanderer, the vanishing camp, still there and yet gone, a place that remembers and keeps its secrets hidden in the mist. It was late November. The air smelled of wet pine and frost. The station sat isolated, perched on its stilts, 30 feet above the forest floor. Wind whispered through the trees, stirring dry needles against the boards below. I was alone. The hum of the heater filled the small room. Paper rustled softly as I checked reports, the pen scratching in my notebook. Outside, darkness pressed against the windows thick and velvet. Then I saw it, a pale face, reflected in the glass. Eyes wide, still, watching, my heart stilled. I leaned forward, breath fogging the pain. The face vanished. I blinked. Nothing but the night outside, black and empty. I shook my head. Thought it was fatigue, the long shift playing tricks. Yet moments later, there it was again. Closer this time, pressed against the glass from somewhere I could not reach. I stood, hands trembling slightly. The floorboards groaned beneath me. The heater hummed, filling the silence with a low, static warmth. Outside, the treetops swayed, shadows shifting in the pale light of the moon. I backed away. The reflection remained. Every movement I made, it mirrored. Just the face. Nothing else, no body, no figure. A rustle from below. Leaves scraping against the wooden supports. I swallowed. The forest smelled colder now, damp earth mixing with frost. I peered through the corner of the window. Nothing moved. I tried to tell myself it was my own reflection. But I was not looking straight at it. The angle was wrong. The face hovered 30 feet above the ground. Impossible. My breath quickened. I turned away, heart thumping in the still air. A soft hum, like someone exhaling slowly. The reflection lingered in my mind. Eyes that seemed to pierce through the glass, through the walls. I moved to the door, the metal handle cold against my hand. Every step echoed softly across the floor. The wind outside moaned, brushing branches against the stilts, shaking the building slightly. I glanced back at the window. The face had shifted. Closer to the corner this time, staring directly at me. Pale lips barely parted, as if whispering. Something I could not hear. I tried blinking, shaking my head again. The face did not disappear. It stayed, frozen, watching. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Even the heater's hum seemed muted. I could hear my own pulse. A low, steady thrum against my ears. I approached slowly, hands brushing the edge of the desk. The reflection remained. Still impossible, still wrong. I dared not move quickly. The floor creaked with every cautious step. Outside, the moonlight glimmered off the frost, making the forest pale and indistinct. The air smelled colder, sharper, tinged with something I could not name. I whispered my own name. Nothing answered. Just the reflection, unblinking, watching, patient. I stepped back, heart hammering, and suddenly the heater's hum faltered. The light flickered. The pale face seemed to smile. A slow, knowing curve, then gone. Only the blackness of night. The wind moaning through the stilts. The forest breathing quietly beneath me. Yet I could still feel it. Eyes lingering in the corner of my mind. Watching. I did not sleep that night. Every shadow, every flicker of the trees through the window seemed alive. The cold seeped into my bones. Even when I closed my eyes, the reflection returned, pale and unyielding. By dawn, the forest was calm again. Birdsong timidly returned. The wind softened to a whisper. The station looked normal. Still, I knew the face had not truly gone. It only waited for night, for the dark. for me, and when the lights fade again, I know it will return. Watching. Always. It was early spring. The air smelled of damp earth and melting snow. Fog clung to the trees, curling around the trunks like smoke. I set out along the narrow dirt path, boots pressing into soft mud, breath steaming in front of me. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Birdsong, muted, hesitant, echoed through the forest. Branches whispered above, brushing one another with a dry rustle. I followed the trail, the familiar hum of the valley beneath my feet. But soon, I noticed the trail itself seemed different. A curve I remembered as turning left now appeared straight ahead. The moss-covered stone I passed hours ago glimmered in the fog, as if waiting for me. I stopped. Breath caught in my throat. The air felt heavier. I took another step, and the path shifted again. Not violently, not obviously. Just enough to make me doubt where I had been. The smell of wet pine intensified. My ears picked up a faint static like electricity in the fog. I tried to focus. Landmarks I passed hours ago, the same broken fence post, the bent birch, appeared again. They were closer. Closer than I remembered. My boots sank into familiar mud. The trail was no longer behind me. It was ahead. I stopped completely. The forest around me breathed silently. Leaves shivered in the fog. Every rustle felt deliberate, watching. I tried to mark a branch with a stick. When I looked back, it was gone. The same branch I'd passed an hour ago now loomed ahead. A chill crawled up my spine. The fog thickened, pressing against my skin, smelling faintly of wet stone and decay. I took a careful step. The path curved again. It wasn't just shifting. It was leading me. The forest felt alive. Not with animals. Not with wind. Something else. Silent, patient, observing, I reached a bend I knew well. But instead of opening to the river I expected, the trail looped, presenting a scene I'd seen an hour before. The hum of the forest deepened, resonating low in my chest. The mud squelched underfoot with every hesitant step. I wanted to turn back. But the trail refused to let me. I whispered to myself. A name. Nothing answered. Even the birds had vanished. The fog swallowed sound. The trees leaned closer, shadowed arms reaching. The trail twisted again. Subtle, imperceptible if I blinked. The stones I stepped on were familiar. I knew them too well. I remembered every groove, every crack. And yet they weren't where they should be. Not where I left them. I pressed my hand against a tree trunk. Rough bark, wet and cold. Static prickled along my fingers. The trail curved under my feet. It was no longer just a path. It was a guide. A trap. I stopped. Silence fell. The fog was a wall. I could smell damp soil, pine sap, something faintly metallic. Every rustle, every soft snap of a twig sounded like footsteps behind me. Yet nothing moved. I tried to run. The mud sucked at my boots. The trail bent. I was walking back to the same clearing I'd left hours ago. The same bent birch, the same mossy rock. I froze. The forest exhaled. A soft, low sigh, I whispered, pleading with the trees, with the path itself. The fog swirled. The trail curved again. I saw the distant sun, pale light filtering through mist. But moving toward it did not help. Every step returned me to the same place. The same cold, damp clearing. I sank to my knees. Mud staining my pants. Leaves clinging to my boots. The forest around me was patient, watching, waiting. Hours or minutes passed. I do not know. Time lost meaning here. The trail, the stones, the fog, all in constant, subtle motion. Finally, I rose, careful, every step measured. I stopped trusting my eyes. I stopped trusting my feet. The trail beneath me was no longer a path. It was a question, a presence, a whisper in the mist. I did not turn back. I did not call out. I moved forward, hoping the forest would eventually let me leave, hoping the path would let me go. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew it would remember my steps. Every bend, every footprint, always guiding, always waiting, until I walked it again. It was late autumn. The pine needles carpeted the forest floor in a soft, brittle layer. A chill hung in the air, damp and sharp, curling around my jacket. I had pitched my tent beneath a massive pine, its trunk dark and rough against the pale light. The wind whispered through the branches. They creaked and sighed, the scent of resin sharp and sweet in my nose. I lay on my sleeping pad, listening to the hum of the forest. At first, everything was ordinary, but then a soft scratching began, beneath the earth, low and steady, like claws dragging under the soil. I froze. The wind hushed for a moment, as if it were listening too. I pressed my ear to the ground. Thump, thump. Something moved beneath the roots. It was deliberate, intentional. Each scrape of dirt made the air taste heavier, metallic. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, a mole maybe, or a raccoon burrowing in the pine's massive roots. But the rhythm, too steady, too methodical. A heartbeat beneath the earth. I could feel it through my fingers, pressing against the cold dirt. The roots throbbed with each movement. The air hummed faintly with static. I lay still listening, afraid to breathe too loudly. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time dissolved into the whisper of needles, the soft thumping below. I imagined a chamber forming beneath the roots, a hollow, waiting, silent, watching. By dawn, the first pale light filtered through the mist. I unzipped my tent slowly, breath catching in my chest. The scratching had stopped. The forest exhaled. But the ground, it had changed. The earth beneath the pine had caved slightly. A hollow formed, dark and yawning, smelling sharply of metal and ozone. I knelt at the edge, fingertips brushing the loose soil. It was cold, oddly smooth, as though carved deliberately. The air from the hollow smelled faintly electrical, like a storm trapped underground. I could hear nothing now, but a sense of presence lingered. Something had moved beneath the roots all night. Something alive, patient, waiting. I peered into the dark. Shadows pooled in the hollow, blacker than the early morning. I could see the roots twisted overhead, thick and sinewy, like the veins of a giant heart. A shiver ran through me. The forest around me seemed to lean closer. I reached out. The air was cool, tasting faintly of metal. The earth felt brittle, yet strangely hollow, almost like tapping a drum. Every instinct screamed to step back, to leave. But I couldn't look away. A soft thump echoed from below. A single, deliberate beat. Then silence. Then another. The hollow pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I imagined eyes beneath the soil, glowing faintly, pale and unblinking. Watching me, measuring. The roots trembled slightly under my weight. A whisper of movement, impossible to locate. I stepped back from the edge. The hollow seemed to breathe. The smell of metal and ozone grew stronger, more pungent. I realized the earth had shifted overnight. A chamber had been carved, carefully, silently. The forest seemed to lean in closer. Every rustle of needles, every distant bird call, or absence of them, felt deliberate. I wanted to retreat, to tear my pack from the ground and leave. But my feet felt heavy, bound. Aware that something below was watching my every motion, the hollow waited, cold, silent, electric in its quiet. I traced my fingers along the edge of the soil. A vibration ran through my palm, low, steady, like a pulse. The pine overhead loomed, massive and indifferent. Its roots had hidden this chamber all along, or perhaps created it. The smell of ozone clung to the roots. The air hummed faintly, vibrating against my skin. I realized then that the sound beneath the roots had never been random. It had been a warning, or a lure. I stepped back further. The forest sighed again. A shiver ran through the trunk above me, down into the soil. The hollow remained, dark and patient, smelling of metal and storm. I could almost feel it pulsing beneath the roots, alive in its silence. I gathered my pack. Every step away felt watched. Every breath drawn echoed back from the hollow, slow and deliberate. The roots had hidden something that night, something patient. And I had been too close. I left the pine behind. The scratching had stopped. The hum lingered faintly in my ears, a whisper beneath the wind. The hollow remained, and I knew it would wait always beneath the roots. It was the dead of winter. The forest lay under a pale blanket of frost. The air smelled of cold smoke and pine. I sat alone in the ranger station, the hum of the heater filling the small room. The radio crackled in the corner. Static whispered like distant wind through the trees. I flipped the dial, listening. And then, a voice. Soft, fractured. Don't follow the lights. A pause, a hiss of static. Ah, don't look up. The words hung in the cold air. A shiver ran down my spine. Then the transmission cut abruptly. Only static remained. A high-pitched hum lingered behind it. I leaned closer to the radio, pressing my palm against the cold plastic. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to lean in. Outside, the forest waited. Silent, patient. Hours passed. The wind whispered through the bare branches, scraping at the windows. I stared at the dark tree line. The snow muffled every step. I thought about the ranger's warning, and the hairs along my neck rose. Then a glow, faint at first, flickering between the trunks. Amber, pale, drifting slowly. I held my breath. The light moved with a grace that felt unnatural. A weight pressed in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was a reflection, moonlight catching frost, maybe fireflies. But the forest smelled of ozone and metal, sharp and electric. And the light, it rose, slowly, deliberately. Between the trees, it moved toward the station. I could hear nothing but the static hum in my ears, the creak of the old timber beneath my feet. Each breath tasted cold, iron-like. My hands trembled, brushing against the frost-laden windows. I remembered the words. Don't follow. Don't look up. But I couldn't stop myself. The glow stretched higher, slipping between the branches, pale and warm against the frozen night. It drifted silently, soundless, yet the air felt heavy with its presence. The heater buzzed weakly, a faint rhythm against the silence. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to gauge the distance. The forest seemed to lean closer. The snow held its breath. Even the pines seemed still, as if waiting. The lights paused, hovering just above the ground, then slowly rising. Their ascent was deliberate, like a tide moving toward me. I felt the frost creep along my fingers, the cold pressing through my jacket. My chest tightened with each passing second. I turned away from the window, shaking. The radio crackled again. Static hissed. No words this time, only the sense of presence, of eyes watching through the drift of fog and snow. Hours blurred. The lights drew closer. The hum of static in my ears became a pulse, a heartbeat against the silence. I imagined shadows between the trunks, moving with the amber glow. A forest alive and intruding. I crouched by the door, listening. Every breath made the air taste metallic. The wood of the station creaked under invisible weight. Outside, the snow shimmered faintly. The lights paused again just beyond the tree line, barely a whisper away. I remembered every missing ranger, every abandoned campsite, every warning buried in static and fog. And I understood. This forest, it didn't like to be watched. It didn't like to be followed. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the hum remained. I sank to the floor, cold seeping through my jacket, into my bones. The lights continued to drift closer. They moved with patience, with intent. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't look. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. The lights lingered outside the station, just beyond the windows. The snow held them, amber and unreal, and I felt the pulse of the forest beneath it all, heavy and endless. When dawn finally brushed the sky with pale light, the glow had vanished. The snow was untouched, silent, empty. Only the memory remained, the warning etched into the air, the radio silent, and the sense of isolation, absolute, unbroken. I didn't leave. I didn't move. I sat there listening to the forest breathe, knowing it had come close and could come again, always. The radio lay cold on the floor. Static hummed faintly in memory, and outside, the forest waited, silent, patient, alive.